Before she became a sci-fi icon, Sigourney Weaver walked onto a set where no one believed a woman could survive a monster movie, let alone carry it. The script was darker than audiences ever knew. The studio wanted someone else, and one scene crossed a line so deeply that Weaver was forced to stop production and say no. What happened aboard the Nostromo almost changed Alien forever, and why did Weaver later walk away from the franchise that made her a legend? This is the story of the moments that went too far, the truth that stayed hidden for decades, and the quiet decisions that reshaped film history. John Carpenter's Dark Star. It all began when John Carpenter approached Dan O'Bannon after seeing O'Bannon's USC student Short Blood Bath, a bleak 7-minute horror film. The meeting sparked a collaboration on a low-budget sci-fi project Carpenter planned as his master's thesis, eventually released in 1974 as Dark Star. O'Bannon wore almost every hat on the film: co-writer, editor, production designer, effects supervisor, and even actor. He brought in cartoonist Ron Cobb for effects, while Ronald Shusett, later tied to Alien, volunteered as editor. When producer Jack H. Harris offered distribution on the condition they expand the film to feature length, they agreed, though O'Bannon later joked it turned the most impressive student film into the least impressive professional one. After Dark Star received a lukewarm response, O'Bannon began rethinking the concept. He imagined the same setup, but played straight and terrifying instead of comedic. While still finishing Dark Star, he started drafting a darker script called Star Beast. Because Dark Star had barely been seen, there was little risk anyone would connect the two ideas, famously underscored when an usher reportedly asked, "What audience?" Despite its obscurity, the film did catch the attention of future Alien director Ridley Scott and visionary filmmaker Alejandro Jodorowsky. Jodorowsky was so impressed that he called O'Bannon late one night to say he had the rights to adapt Dune. With Star Beast unfinished and few options at home, O'Bannon, an admirer of Jodorowsky's El Topo, sold his belongings and moved to Paris to work on Dune, a decision that would indirectly shape the birth of Alien. Script-related struggles. Eventually, Brandywine Productions agreed to produce the film for 20th Century Fox. While Ridley Scott was focused on keeping the project on budget, a much uglier drama was unfolding behind the scenes. According to Dan O'Bannon, producers David Giler and Walter Hill attempted to sideline him and take control of the screenplay credit. Giler openly criticized O'Bannon's script, and he and Hill launched a series of rewrites, 8 in total, eventually forcing the issue into arbitration. Giler later claimed the script required such extensive changes that he and Hill rewrote every word of the dialogue, though side-by-side comparisons suggest that claim was exaggerated. He also argued that their revisions added the feminist elements people now associate with the film, insisting O'Bannon's original characters were militaristic and male. In reality, O'Bannon's early Star Beast draft already contained many of the film's core ideas: the xenomorph, the space jockey, and the derelict ship, though it also featured no women, no androids, and a bizarre pyramid-shaped egg silo. Hill and Giler's versions introduced Ripley, Dallas, corporate conspiracies, and human-looking androids, but they also flirted with wildly impractical ideas. Some drafts involved time travel, historical figures like Jack the Ripper and Genghis Khan, and even versions with no alien at all. That alien emerged at all from this chaos is almost miraculous. Scott's final vision, especially as seen in Alien, the director's cut, ultimately bore little resemblance to O'Bannon's original intent. "I didn't write Play It Slow," O'Bannon later complained. "Ridley did, and he was damn lucky it worked." As one observer later put it, O'Bannon, the man whose idea started everything, was largely pushed aside in the process. The R-rated alien scene that went too far for Sigourney Weaver. One of the most surprising things about the Alien franchise is how much of its success came from chance rather than careful planning. By the second film, Sigourney Weaver's Ellen Ripley was firmly established as the face of the series and one of the most iconic sci-fi heroes ever created. But in the earliest drafts of Alien, Ripley wasn't even written as a woman. And when her gender was changed, her survival had nothing to do with feminism. It was simply meant to shock the audience. As Weaver explained in a 2006 interview with Total Film, no one involved was trying to make a political statement. "No one on that film was a feminist," she said. "Everyone thought, who would ever think the woman survives? So it was really just about subverting expectations." There's a common claim that all the characters in Alien were originally gender neutral. That's partly true, but the script went through heavy rewrites and not every version followed that idea. At one point, the script even included a sex scene between Ripley and Captain Dallas, played by Tom Skerritt. According to film historian Roger Luckhurst, the scene was meant to provide relief for the crew after Kane's death. But Weaver immediately questioned it. During a 2022 interview on Marc Maron's WTF podcast, Weaver compared the script to And Then There Were None, with characters eliminated one by one until only one remains. From the writer's perspective, she explained, making the woman the survivor was simply a twist no one would see coming. She also recalled that 20th Century Fox was hesitant to cast her because she was unknown at the time, and that she was just really lucky Ridley Scott, and the producers believed in her. Weaver didn't hesitate to voice her concerns to Scott, especially about the Ripley-Dallas sex scene. She questioned whether it made any sense for the characters to hook up while a deadly creature was stalking the ship. Although Scott reportedly liked the scene, he ultimately agreed to cut it. That decision helped define Ripley as a character whose gender was largely irrelevant to the story. Aside from a few early moments where her authority is questioned, Ripley isn't defined by romance or sexuality. Any connection between her and Dallas comes across as professional respect, not attraction. The only downside is that cutting the scene removed a chance to deepen the supporting characters before most of them are killed. Alien is gripping and atmospheric, but the rapid loss of the crew means figures like Dallas and Kane don't leave as strong an impression as they might have. Even so, removing unnecessary subplots allowed Ripley to emerge simply as the survivor, and that choice helped Alien change science fiction forever. David Cronenberg cries foul. According to Foss, Dan O'Bannon wrote the famous chestburster scene after experiencing a severe bout of indigestion caused by Crohn's disease. In his own words, O'Bannon imagined there was a beast trapped inside his body, trying to tear its way out, and that sensation became the foundation of Alien's most shocking moment. H.R. Giger later echoed this idea, suggesting the scene came from O'Bannon picturing his pain physically bursting out of him. It's a convincing explanation, though not everyone agrees. One prominent critic has accused Alien of borrowing too much, filmmaker David Cronenberg. While he acknowledges that inspiration can be flattering, Cronenberg has argued that the xenomorph closely resembles the parasite from his 1975 body horror film Shivers, released in the U.S. as They Came From Within. That movie centers on a parasite that lives inside the human body, violently escapes, and invades others, a description that does sound uncomfortably familiar. Cronenberg has said his concerns were relayed to him by John Landis, though Landis's only public complaint about the xenomorph focused on the creature's bizarre inner mouth. Ironically, that feature wasn't part of Giger's original design at all. It was added later by effects artist Carlo Rambaldi. Cronenberg has also admitted that Alien was far more successful than any of his films, but his criticisms haven't helped his case. Referring to Alien as a $300,000 B-movie with a $10 million budget, or comparing the xenomorph to a man in a crocodile suit, tends to undercut the argument. There are deleted scenes you might not have heard about. Not everything filmed for Alien made it into the final cut, and some of what was removed was far darker. In fact, the original ending was almost entirely different and considerably more depressing. Brett, played by Harry Dean Stanton, is famously killed in the elevator shaft, but his death was originally meant to be far more brutal. Early versions had him impaled on the alien's tail, having his heart torn out or crushed in the xenomorph's clawed hand before his face was eaten. Ultimately, these moments were cut to preserve the film's less is more approach to horror. Only fragments of that tail sequence survived, later repurposed during Lambert's death. Lambert's fate is especially disturbing because it's left mostly to the imagination. She freezes in terror, unable to move. A more explicit version of her death was filmed, but it didn't work. Between the awkward movement of the alien and the lack of suspense, the scene lost its impact. Cutting it made the moment far more frightening. One deleted scene that did survive appears in the director's cut: Lambert slapping Ripley. Veronica Cartwright later said she was glad the moment was restored, feeling Ripley deserved it for refusing to let the crew back onto the ship. Sigourney Weaver was paid extra to shave her head. In the bleak world of Alien 3, Ellen Ripley shaves her head to meet the harsh conditions of the prison planet Fiorina 161 after a lice outbreak. Off-screen, that drastic change came with a major paycheck. Sigourney Weaver was reportedly paid $4 million just to shave her head for Ripley's darkest chapter. After filming Wrapped, Weaver moved on to other projects and wore a wig while her hair grew back. But the troubled production wasn't finished. When reshoots were required, she had to shave her head all over again, undoing months of regrowth. Thanks to a clause in her contract, she earned an additional $300,000 for doing it twice. In the end, Weaver didn't regret it at all. She later admitted she actually loved the look, telling the New York Times, "It was a great haircut. I kind of miss it." Michael Biehn was actually paid not to be in Alien 3. It's not often an actor gets paid for not being in a movie, but that's exactly what happened to Michael Biehn with Alien 3. Thanks to sharp-eyed friends and agents who knew how to enforce a contract, Biehn discovered the studio planned to use his likeness without his permission. He learned that a face cast made for Aliens had been used to create a dummy of his character, Hicks, for a scene where a chestburster bursts from his torso. Biehn was furious. He contacted his agent, who immediately warned Fox they had no right to use his image. Soon after, director David Fincher called, asking if they could keep Hicks in the film. Biehn's response was blunt, especially after being excluded from the movie altogether. Biehn refused to allow the chestburster scene, forcing the studio to compromise. Instead, they used a brief, grainy image of Hicks in the finished film, and only after agreeing to pay him. In the end, Biehn walked away with compensation for a role he never actually played. Sigourney Weaver actually made that trick basketball shot in Alien Resurrection. In Alien Resurrection, Ripley 8, a clone of the original Ellen Ripley, finds herself living among a crew of space pirates after being brought back as part of a failed experiment to weaponize the xenomorphs. As Ripley predicts, everything eventually spirals into chaos. But before that happens, she has a memorable moment. She humiliates the entire crew in a game of basketball, finishing with an impossible no-look shot tossed backward over her head. What makes the scene even better is that Sigourney Weaver actually made the shot herself. Director Jean-Pierre Jeunet was ready to use a double, but Weaver insisted on doing it for real. She practiced for 2 weeks and said that by filming day, she was making about one shot out of every 6 attempts. Despite persistent rumors that she nailed it on the first try, the basket actually took 3 takes. Still, the moment was so impressive that Ron Perlman's stunned, profanity-laced reaction had to be edited out of the final cut. A deleted scene from Aliens inspired the creation for Romulus. Horror veteran Fede Alvarez drew inspiration for his Alien film from a deleted scene in Aliens. Noticing the brief glimpse of children living in the space colony and thinking about Weyland-Yutani's ruthless exploitation, he became interested in what life in space would feel like for young people desperate to escape it. Once you're in your teens or 20s, you're going to rebel. Alvarez explained on cue with Tom Power. No one wants to spend 50 years on a planet where your only future is mining or farming. That urge to break free became the foundation for the story of Rain, played by Kaylee Spinney, and her friends. And judging by the box office success of Alien Romulus, audiences clearly connected with that idea. Alien is kind of a big deal in academia. Academia has a long-standing obsession with Alien. Media scholars and cultural critics keep finding new angles to analyze. The parasitic creature that reproduces through violation, the cold indifference of the ship's computer, the ruthless corporate agenda, the question of whether androids deserve personhood, and Sigourney Weaver's unforgettable turn as the tough, pragmatic Ellen Ripley. And if the grotesque imagery, groundbreaking effects, and infamous production history aren't enough, critics can always turn to its feminist undertones, Freudian anxieties, or Marxist critiques of labor and power. That depth is reflected in works like Alien and Philosophy, a 2017 essay collection devoted entirely to unpacking the film's themes. It's dense academic material, but it proves that the xenomorph represents far more than a monster in a suit. Much of Alien's richness comes from its turbulent creation. The film evolved through endless rewrites, creative clashes between Dan O'Bannon and the producers, the heavy influence of H.P. Lovecraft on O'Bannon and H.R. Geiger, tight budgets that forced bold choices, and even last-minute casting changes. One of those changes brought in John Hurt, whose shocking chest-burster scene remains one of the most iconic deaths in horror history. Now we want to hear from you. What do you think is the most important truth about Alien that fans still overlook? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more revealing stories about classic films and icons like this.